Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the DLC Drop Podcast. Today it's my pleasure to welcome Paul Sampson, who is the founder and CEO of Licht. What they are doing is democratizing licensed music for the metaverse through micro-licensing. Paul's going to take you through how to recognize new trends, how to convince people of your mindset, and talk all about what Licht is doing in this space. Join me in talking to Paul. Drop in the untold stories of industry leaders, influencers, and insights on future innovation. I'm John Davidson, and this is the DLC Drop Podcast. All right, Paul Sampson, CEO and founder of Licht. Thank you so much for joining me today on the DLC Drop Podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm very well, sir. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And where, for our audience, where are you joining us from across the pond from Dallas, Texas, where we're recording today over here?
From Dallas, Texas, you are communicating with Kentish Town in northwest London.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Worldwide.
We have an office in Soho in central London, but I'm at home today.
Wonderful. Well, I really appreciate you joining me today. It was great to get connected through your team. And, some people might see the name Licht and assume all sorts of things of what you might be doing. So why don't you tell us what exactly is Licht?
So Licht is a micro-licensing music solutions company. We are the first company to enable chart music licensing for user-generated content creators legally and without punishment. But as the company evolves, there appears to be many more problems that are solvable on behalf of the music rights community and music industry by way of innovation and the building of tech solutions that provide wins across the value chain for users and creators everywhere. So Licht's mission is to democratize music for the world's creators. And by the world's creators, that could mean content creators, brands that create, or builders of the metaverse.
That's really interesting. I think anybody who has created content, even the teenage self years and years ago, I remember making like a 30-second pretend skateboarding commercial, and I put, an official song by, somebody who I really liked, and, YouTube popped up, no audio on this track, you can't use this, and that's probably the least that can happen to you. No fines came my way, fortunately. But help explain this to us, where it sounds like we're in a different world nowadays than the world when all these clauses and licenses were initially created. And so we need different solutions and companies like yours to help innovate that, it sounds like. Can you explain kind of the difference between those two worlds of when these licenses were developed and then the new world we live in where that no longer applies in the same way?
Yeah, sure. So just to give you some background, I've been putting music to picture, which is called sync licensing, short for synchronization licensing. I've been doing that since 2005. I did it in New York and London and LA. In fact, straight out of uni in 1999, I worked in television before I got into the music industry. And actually, that's where I first started putting music to picture, but just from the other side of the coin, if you like.
Interesting, yeah.
I remember actually... when I think back, I could draw a straight line from this memory to where I am today, right? Which was, I went on a shoot as a senior researcher for this TV show, and then was in the office the next day. And then that day, the producer came to me and said, "You're going to have to direct the edit tomorrow because the director from your shoot has come down ill and can't come in."
Oh, wow.
And I'd been on the shoot, so I was able to help the editor say, well, we shot this and we shot that. And the thinking was, this is the narrative, etc., right? Help them save time. And I got really excited because it was a new opportunity for me. And I went home that night and I went through all my CDs. And I was like, I'm going to put this song here, that song there. And I went into work and I walked into the edit suite and I was like, hey, I'm directing the edit today. And I had like 10 CDs in my hand. And the guy, the editor, looked at me and he said, what you got there? And I was like, oh, music for the show. And he was like, we have a music budget? And I said,
what's a music budget?
I said, no, I own the music. And he looked at me and laughed and said, "You own the plastic. You don't
Right.
own the music." And I was like, "What?" And that was like the first time I learned that, you had to license music, and that, every time music was played on TV or any kind of broadcast, that there was a payment due to someone. And of course, you need permission of some description to use the music. He then alerted me to these shelves all over the walls of the same color CD spines, and said, "This is what's called production music or stock music. We have deals in place with all of these companies for unlimited use. You can use any of this." And then he used a 4-letter word. My mind was blown, and it was really, it's quite funny to me that 5 short years later, I was in that very industry.
Wow.
In the States, and I've been in it ever since. So, like I alluded to, every time you watch a film or a trailer or an advert or a TV show, there is music in it. Someone is tasked with creatively pitching that music into that piece of content, and then if that music wins that pitch, then people have to negotiate for the fees or the rights to use that music, and that's what sync licensing is, and that's what I've been doing. So I did it in New York from 2005. By the time I'm back in London 11, 12 years later, I realized that all of those businesses that have been my clients for 11 years are just big production companies. And that actually all the resources of production companies by this time have been democratized to the laptop I'm looking at you on, the phone that we had our first call on, and the home camera.
Right.
That everyone is a production company today. And in fact, the only resource available to production companies that was not available to the fastest growing production sector in the world was what I did. I thought, hang on, who's going to democratize licensing for this production sector?
Right.
So I started looking at YouTube. And, all these stats were coming out about YouTube, 600 hours of content being uploaded every minute, and you just start looking at it going, this is a behemoth, and the number one player in the market at the time. And I started looking into it, and I learned about something called Content ID. So without wanting to bore everyone, YouTube has a piece of proprietary software called Content ID. Think of it as Shazam for YouTube.
Yeah.
Right? And what it does, if I'm Warner Music, I feed my music into Content ID. It fingerprints and memorizes my music, relates it back to me as the owner. And whenever it hears any of my music on YouTube, it presumes that music has been used without my permission. And it penalizes the video that used the music. And if you're lucky, that penalty means that you just won't earn anything from that video, because the revenue will go to me as Warner Music.
Or they don't play your audio on it, like what happened with my video years ago.
Yeah. If you're unlucky, you're muted or you're taken down or blocked, right?
Right.
The unintended consequence of that was that when YouTube developed their partnership program, when people started becoming YouTubers and started earning money, then using famous music meant giving all of that money up.
Right.
And so they created this vacuum where the music industry created a vacuum where all the low-end stuff, like, the cat videos and your mum's birthday, that was all using music, and it was generating the music industry 0.00003 pennies a video for 100 views, right?
Sure.
But the real quality content that was getting millions of views or hundreds of thousands of views was forced into using music that YouTube didn't recognize. Right?
Interesting.
And what I said to the music industry was, imagine this is TV and your music's not being played. So there are 2 generations that just aren't hearing your music, and that's not good for you.
Right.
So I thought, hang on a minute. If you could solve that presumption of guilt by Content ID, by building innovative software, and solve that part of the issue, then you could, on top of that, build something like Spotify, right? Where creators could come and search for artists, audition them, and then legally pay for a license to use their favorite song. And the magic software you built first, would then protect them on YouTube. then
Right.
you'd have something valuable. And that's what Licked 1.0 is. It's Spotify for creators, for want of a better term. There's now 10,000 labels and publishers signed to Licked, over 1.2 million songs available to creators on multiple platforms for the first time ever. We also have a stock music catalog, because stock does things quite well that chart music doesn't. Things like suspense and thriller and drama. And if you want something to sound like Pirates of the Caribbean, you're not going to get it from Ed Sheeran, right? So you need other parts of your toolkit. And the plan is to make every song in the world available for creators easily, simply, and affordably.
The DLC Drop podcast is sponsored by Ice Shaker. I've been a huge fan of this brand for the past few years, ever since I met founder Chris Gronkowski. What I love about this product is the brand story, the functionality, and the customization. Ice Shaker is a Shark Tank company invested in by Mark Cuban and Alex Rodriguez, owned by NFL players Rob Gronkowski and Chris Gronkowski. I love using my ice shaker anytime I'm driving to the podcast studio, I'm going skateboarding, or I'm at the gym. No matter what I'm doing, it just does a great job of keeping my drinks hot or cold. The customization for ice shaker is something that's super unique. You can get any name, just about any logo engraved onto your ice shaker and delivered to you within just 3 to 5 business days. Get your own DLC Drop branded ice shaker at iceshaker.com/DLC Drop. Save 20% on all ice shaker products with the discount code DLC Drop. That's incredible. Now you said that's Licked 1.0. Is that where we're at currently, and we're looking forward to more innovation there, or are we yet at Licked 2.0 or 3.0?
Good question. So if I take you back to what the mission was, democratize music for the world's creators, I keep seeing more opportunity, right? I was right about that opportunity. It's driving revenue for the music industry. Mm-hmm. And recently we've seen a couple of other areas where we think, hang on a minute, this could be another big opportunity for creators and for the music industry, but it's going to need a tech solution that the industry won't build.
Okay.
So if we build it, can we exploit another opportunity for everyone in the value chain and make life better for everyone? One of those I'm particularly excited about is for the metaverse.
I've heard of it.
Yeah, you've heard of it. So there's lots of really interesting things going on between the music industry and the metaverse, right? Yeah. We already work with Fortnite around their concerts. I won't go into it. It's not particularly relevant, but there's various solutions they need assistance with to make the concerts go well that we help them with.
Right.
But, there's launch parties in Roblox, concerts in Fortnite, and lots of massive artists doing big NFT drops, and we can argue through the night about the value of those, right?
Right.
But what occurred to me was that the ongoing, always-on, scalable opportunity for the music industry in the metaverse is to be able to recreate background music licensing rights for every venue in the metaverse. Right? Like, our avatars aren't eating and our avatars aren't sleeping, so there'll be no hotels and no restaurants, right? But there'll be something akin to bars, cafes where people can meet up, clubs and casinos and all these other places where you engage. And everything I've just mentioned in the real world has music playing in the background. Right. And there have been studies decades old that show that the better the music and the more on-brand the music in a retail outlet, the longer the customer's going to stay, the more likely that they are to purchase, right? There's all sorts of data around that. And it occurs to me that why should the metaverse sound really bad, right? Why that shouldn't be the case.
Right. Well, I think that's a really interesting point, because as we know, kind of the recent reason for the adoption of the metaverse or embracing it is young people value digital experiences. And, a lot of gamers will go into these metaverse platforms and they'll say, I don't see anything really new here. I'm doing this in NBA 2K. I'm doing this in Grand Theft Auto, all these other things. But as we have these platforms open, it's a great point that thinking all the way through it, and the audio piece of it is a huge piece of it. And we were talking about this the other day with it's not dissimilar from the video games growth phase with audio, where back in the day it was just arcade music and you got these kind of silly just beats going back and forth, and Tony Hawk Pro Skater and other video games became innovators in bringing in music from musical artists. And that not only benefited the video games, it greatly benefited the artists who, every time you start over that level, you know, you hear that song again, and that you hear that song, it's part of your childhood, it's part of your memories, right? And then when we go into the physical of retail, like you're talking about, there is so much science and thought through the audio experience of somebody going into a store and what makes you stay longer, what makes you in a mood more likely to buy a product. And we need to take these learnings in these other industries and now apply them to this new world. Is that right?
Yeah, 100%. So I was speaking with a metaverse platform, and they said, look, come and take a look round. And so we're on this video conference call, and they jump into their district on their laptop, and we watch their avatar walk into a jazz bar. So here we are in this jazz bar, and the jazz bar is playing stock music, jazz, library jazz.
If you're a fan of jazz, that's going to be especially impactful on you in not the most positive way.
A nightmare, right?
Right.
and then the guy looked at me and said, "It gets worse." And we left the jazz bar and walked across the street. There was a techno club. Walked into the techno club, and they were playing stock music techno.
Yikes!
Like, I think stock music techno is one of the most horrifying sentences I've ever said. Right? It's like being naked in public, right? It just scares the bejesus out of me. So I looked at my colleague and I just shook my head, right? Because I'm famous in Licht within our team for saying, right, I always use this analogy that whenever there's a crack that appears in a rock, water gets there on day one, right? Water will always find the crack in a rock.
Yeah. And
whenever there is a fissure in the digital landscape, stock music always fills it on day one.
Interesting. Yeah.
And the reason I use that analogy for my team is because I say our job is to make sure that we can enable chart music that people know and love to get there on day one or in the evening or the morning of day two, right?
Right.
If not, be ready prior to the fissure opening. So I looked at my colleague and I was like, look, this is screaming out for us to build the technology that can enable it and to build a commercial model that means we can attract the rights holders and not spend years negotiating with them. I mean, when I came up with Licht 1.0, and I considered the metaverse product to be 2.0, right? With 1.0, you know, I naively went to the music industry with this software we've built and said, look at the gap in the market and look at the software we've built that can close that gap for you. And I thought they were going to hold me aloft their shoulders like the hero I thought I was. And they did not. And actually, the music industry has a history of resisting technology, right? When it comes to adopting innovation, they're only slightly ahead of the Amish. So what they do is you sort of creep up to the music industry with a bowl full of stones and go, look at all these shiny new stones I've got for you. Mm-hmm. And they look up from bashing the blood out of the stone they've got in front of them and say, leave me alone, I'm still trying to get more out of this one, right?
Amazing.
So that's a problem. And using our experience of dealing with the music industry, understanding what precedents they will and won't break, which ones they want to set, who are the early adopters that can move a market, and using that experience to cut, 5 years down to 1 year even. Is the benefit we have from being in the market for as long as we have. And there are clauses in music agreements, this is what you're alluding to in your first question, that have been in there for 50, 60 years that aren't fit for a modern entertainment landscape.
Right.
And because they often work in the music industry's interests, people are loath to remove them in some cases. But you have to find the levers within these behemoths, the people that want to innovate, and reason with them and say, listen, whether you remove it or not, we need to be able to ignore it in this instance, or speak to your lawyers and find a carve out for it in this instance, right? That means we're not all exposed. But we need to be able to move forwards, and you need to be able to explain to your artists and your songwriters that we're acting in their best interests.
Yeah, I really want to dig in a little bit there. First, I want to make a quick point. I love you expressing the need for urgency. Get there evening of day one, get there day two, rather than we have plenty of time. Because I'm connected with a number of metaverse platforms. I've been on demos where I'm bringing in a potential client to a metaverse platform, and I will tell you, it's that first experience. There's never a second chance to make a first impression, right? And if somebody goes in there, if it doesn't hit, if they don't see the value, or they don't feel like this is something they want to come back to, there's not a second opportunity. You're not going to have, months or years in the future where like, but now we have chart music. It's like, no, we've been there. It wasn't a fit, etc. So I think that part's super important. I want to dig in with you on this piece of helping people realize that they should pivot their business, or convincing people to do something that they wouldn't do otherwise. Can you give our audience some nuggets of wisdom here? What did you find successful, whether it's a specific tactic you've always used, or something in this specific situation that helped people who say, we've always done it this way, it benefits us, we're holding all the keys, to say, wait a minute, it's worth this time and effort to change what we've always done?
Yeah. So there's a few things there. One I alluded to, which is find the levers, right? There will always be someone in that organization who is with you.
Yeah.
Right. So you need to find that person as soon as possible. You can do it by luck, by networking, or you might find it through logic. I'll come back to that piece. Two is tenacity, right? We talk about startups, and the really successful startup founders will always tell you that perseverance was 99% of their success.
Yep.
And the third is precedent, right? Look around at analogous industries, whether or not they face the same challenges, and either what successes they can demonstrate as a result of adopting the innovation, or what pitfalls they fell down by not, right? And often in the music industry, I won't go into which clauses that we had to get changed, and whether or how they got changed. But I was being told, even by the people that first invested in it, an individual gave me my seed funding, and he said, Paul, I'm behind you 100%. You can change the face of this part of the industry. But please stop going after the major labels and publishers. It's a pipe dream. It will never happen. Now, two of them are on our cap table. Right?
Wow.
Yeah. The music industry was having a fight with YouTube, and it was having that fight in the courtrooms of the EU and in Congress. And I was following that fight quite closely because I was having my own fight with the labels about YouTube also.
Yeah.
And I was struggling with, how am I going to get past this particular issue that they've got, this legacy clause? And then I read an article that said, central to the music industry's case against YouTube was that the Digital Millennial Copyright Act that was written in 1998, that provided YouTube and companies like it with the protection the music industry was arguing YouTube should benefit from. Their argument was it was written 7 years before online video and user-generated content became a thing.
Wow.
And therefore, no one foresaw YouTube or companies or use cases like YouTube benefiting from this protection. So it needs rewriting, and it's not fit for purpose.
And can you explain what that protection was so the audience knows specifically? I believe it's, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's if a user uses music they shouldn't, or something that's has an intellectual property that I'm having a license for, it's the individual's fault. It's not the platform's fault, meaning YouTube's fault. Is that accurate?
Yeah. So there was a clause in the DMCA called safe harbor, and it was intended to provide ISPs with protection from copyright infringement that happened on their platform. So let me give you an example of that. It's the year 1999, and I download an illegal MP3 from Napster.
Right.
And I use Hotmail to email you that MP3. Safe harbor. Hotmail was protected under that safe harbor clause. They were saying it's not Hotmail that is infringing the copyright, right? It's the user that is infringing the copyright.
Right.
So this case that YouTube should be held liable for what happens on its platform was the music industry's argument, but YouTube was being protected by safe harbor. Now, in Europe, the music industry won that case.
Interesting.
And not just YouTube, all sorts of platforms are now no longer under safe harbor. The originally intended ISPs are, right?
Yeah.
But lots of other networks are now no longer protected by safe harbor and have to take lots of steps to make sure that no infringement of copyright happens on their platform. Otherwise, the platform itself is liable.
Right.
Right? Do you remember back in 1999 or the early 2000s when we kept hearing like scare stories of just Sony Music sued John Smith up the road for $200 million because he had 50,000 MP3s on his laptop?
Of course, that's what kept me off of Napster and LimeWire.
Okay, so it was those legal cases that set up the lawsuits, right?
Yeah.
That set up those arguments. We go after a few, we scare everyone, then we make the big argument in court, right?
Right.
So the music industry was arguing that YouTube shouldn't be protected by the DMCA because the DMCA was written 7 years before YouTube was written. And there were clauses in artists' agreement and rights holders' agreements that everyone was telling me, you can't do what you want to do because of those clauses.
Yeah.
And when I heard the music industry had used that argument, I immediately called our lawyer and I was like, when were our clauses, the ones that are blocking us, when were they written? And the answer came back 1955, 1962, 1964. Right. And I was like, if you want to move into this digital world smoothly and effectively, you have to look at some of these clauses and you have to find ways to work with them, around them, or ride roughshod over them. And luckily, we've been able to do that. In terms of finding the leverage, there will always be innovators within an organization that are with you, right?
Right.
You'll often find them saying to you, "Don't tell anyone, but if you ever need anyone, I'll jump ship here and come to you because I can't bear how slow things are around here, right?"
Yeah.
But so there's either innovators or there's people with pain points. I'll give you a perfect example. I went into the major labels via the marketing teams. Because I thought, hang on a minute, everyone in this label has a problem with YouTube, but wouldn't the marketing team have a problem on YouTube? Because if I'm the marketing team, I need to get this to release as many listeners as possible. And now there are influencers. And the influencer owns an audience. And I want that audience because it shares that channel shares an audience with my artist. This is a happy marriage. But if they can't use my song without getting demonetized, then I can't look at that as a route to market. Yeah. And so I went to the marketing departments, right, and said, hey, we've built this software that means influencers can now, well, any YouTuber, but also influencers, can use music without losing their revenue. And I started working with commercial music from the major labels on my terms because I was seen as a vendor to the marketing departments.
Wow. I think something within that too is, well, it makes a world of difference when you get to the right person, right? Yeah. I mean, I've had a ton of conversations with people and it's just like, it didn't move forward because it was a person sitting next to him rather than the person I'm talking to, and they're too busy or don't care to give me that introduction. Yeah. The other thing that I've really learned throughout my career is asking people what they need. And I used to serve as head of GameStop partnerships back in the day. And so I got all sorts of people pitching me. And people would assume what my pain points were or what I wanted to accomplish. And my pain point was not what they actually thought it was typically. But when you come to somebody and you find out a real problem they're trying to figure out and you have that solution, there's budget for that more times than not, right?
Absolutely right. Absolutely. And that's why when I said find the leverage. The leverage is either a pain point or someone with a pain point or someone that's behind you, right? Yeah. And what you want to happen is you want slowly or quickly for the tone of voice used around you and your solution to change within that organization. And to do that, you have to start with an advocate. And so I went to the market. My advisors were saying, you won't get an agreement with them. And I thought, well, hang on a minute. If I can solve a problem for the marketing department, I don't need an agreement. They'll sign mine.
Right. Good point.
And I won't have all the music, but I'll be in business with them. Right. And then the marketing department displays a success internally. And then someone goes, how did you do that?
Now you've got a case study.
Yeah. And then the next time you call that other person, they're a bit warmer to you. And slowly we filtered our way in. But now I think we have the trust of rights holders for the most part. And that now when we go to them and say, hey, isn't this an area you should be doing more in? They typically have said, that we've been looking at that for years. We can't solve it. And we go, well, we built something, right? Or they come to us and say, we're not the right people to do this, but if you could build X and Y, we'd really use it. And that's the best indication you could wish for, because there's a market right there. You've got a customer on day one, right?
Right. Another thing I'm taking from you, it doesn't seem like you take the answer no very well. It seems like the tenacity, the perseverance part of that sounds like, in the 1.5 conversations that we've had, what I've learned about you, Paul, is if somebody tells you no, there's something within you to prove them wrong. Is that accurate?
There is. It is accurate. I'm not sure it's a healthy attribute. I get very vexed. I find myself having lots of arguments by myself.
Okay.
Like running the argument over in my head and getting more and more frustrated at the idiocy of the fact that we're having the debate, right? When in fact the debate is over. So many times I've been arguing with people about YouTube, and I'm like, there's TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram, right? Like, you're still arguing with me about YouTube, and there's 4 more platforms to go. Right. I don't take no for an answer. I think that you need to have a limit on that. You don't want to be barking up the wrong tree constantly. Sure. But I will tell you that the head of global digital for one of the 3 major labels, when we finally got our deal done, I was in Los Angeles and I met with him, and he introduced me to his lawyer, and he said to his lawyer, you haven't met Paul, have you? And I said, no. And he said, Paul's the most tenacious beep I've ever met in my life. And looked at me and said, you got your deal done. I said, we got our deal done, yeah. But look, especially, I only feel that way if there's common sense behind it, right? If I feel like common sense is being ignored, then of course I'll keep up the good fight.
Is that something that you're just born this way? This is your personality? You saw maybe your parents or other people around you being successful with it, or something that you learned throughout your career?
I think it's partly innate, but also like when you've been doing something for as long as I have, and you feel like you know it inside out, then the direction of travel seems quite clear.
Right.
And you might come up with it first, and so you're never as adamant about it, when it first occurs to you, perhaps ahead of other people. Mm-hmm. But when you knock it about a bit with a few people, and you get nothing but that makes perfect sense, and this is the way it should work, and this is where it's going to, and this is what it could become.
Right.
Then I get frustrated with people not coming around to that way of thinking as quickly as they should.
Well, I think too, something that I've experienced, I've worked for a variety of companies. I've worked for companies where what I'm selling I don't believe in. And then when I'm in dire straits, harder times, then when I'm, in a better situation, I'm working for a company or I'm working for myself, and I don't feel like I'm selling, I'm preaching.
Yes.
I'm not trying to sell you something. I'm trying to help you. And it doesn't it happens to not be free, but look at how you could benefit. And I feel like when I'm in those situations, I'm much more tenacious. You still have to be tactful with your follow-ups and everything, but I have no apologies for checking in again or feeling like I'm bothering someone, because if you could understand, if I can open your eyes to this solution that I have, you're going to thank me. You're not going to be bothered by a follow-up email.
Yes. Yeah. And so often, by the way, you've nailed that. You're absolutely right. Like, I'm not doing this just for me. You are the primary beneficiary of what I'm proposing, right? And that's what drives me nuts, is that even when you win that argument, sometimes they'll say, okay, you can try and make us money, but please do it with one hand tied behind your back.
Exactly.
And you go, why? Why would you make me do that? It's so, but, so be it. You have to go and make the money with a hand tied behind your back, and then they'll uncuff your other hand and you can all move forwards. And forget it ever happened.
Precisely. Onward and upward. Something else I've noticed about your story here is your ability to notice trends. So you started, you recognize the YouTube thing, you see Web3, you see the metaverse emerge, and you're seeing what's coming ahead of it being there. Walk me through some of that, whether there's something you do to recognize trends, or what's been successful in the past that our audience can replicate, being ahead of the curve.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, I think all these things are relative, right? Like, within the Licked team, I'm not the early adopter. I'm not the futurist. I'm not the technologist, right? Within my group of friends, I'm Elon Musk, right? So, I'm early 40s, and my friends are restaurateurs, or some of them are lawyers, right? And they don't know anything about the music industry or technology, and they look to me as someone who can explain, social media and rights and copyright and so on. But within my team and within my industry, people are much more early adopters or tech savvy and web savvy than I am. But I surround myself with them.
Mm-hmm.
And I read a lot, right? I've got RSS feeds on anything to do with Web3 and YouTube, and slowly but surely, even if I don't read any of the articles that come into my feed, my Slack notification, by the end of a day, I can give you a rough idea of what's happened in the industry just by the toast notification on my phone. Just seeing 5 or 6 of the headlines.
Yeah,
right? I'll be like, okay. Even subliminally, you get a sense of the movement that happened that day. I go to a lot of conferences, right, for things outside our industry, like about Web3, about metaverse, and if you keep yourself abreast of it, if you know a topic like we know music and licensing, as well as we do, you can look at another industry and go, is there an opportunity for us there? Is this something that's going to face the same issues analogously that YouTube did? I mean, the first time I spoke to, 7 years ago, I started listening to podcasts religiously, before most people did, actually. And I just said I wasn't an early adopter, but I'm much more, I take on information much better through audio than I do any other delivery system.
Yeah.
So for 7 to 10 years now, I've been doing 3-4 hours of podcast a day. And then I met someone that works at a podcast network. It hadn't occurred to me there was such a thing.
Right.
And he was saying, blah, blah, and he started talking about the growth of podcasts. And I was like, this sounds a lot like the growth of YouTube, like the sort of numbers you're talking to me about.
Mm-hmm.
And then immediately I thought, I wonder if you can license music. I bet you can't license music for podcasts.
Right.
And I spoke to him, and he said, yeah, well, we have trouble with it, but no one's really listening. Like, the music industry isn't really taking notice of us right now. And I was like, well, they will. I've seen this story before, and sure enough, I called all the existing authorities and said, pretended I had a podcast that was doing well and could I license music? There's no actual mechanism to do that. We only have it for personal licenses and things like that. And I was like, well, we need to build a podcast solution.
Right.
So that was me learning about podcasts, not me going in about music. But you start to see, hang on a minute, the growth of that thing looks a lot like the growth of that thing. And this is what happened in their story, right? The shape of startups and trends tend to take certain forms.
Yes.
Right? And if you've seen a gorilla before, and then what you're seeing now looks like two hairy ape feet, right? You can be pretty sure it's going to turn into a gorilla by the time it's fully grown.
Absolutely. And I think that a lot of that comes into the way you're forming teams. You expressed you're not, what do they say? If you're the smartest one in the room, you're in the wrong room, sort of a thing.
Yeah.
And so you may not be the early adopter or the technical minded person, but you've hired those people or they're your partners. Yes. And when you have people who they're part of modern culture, they're part of popular culture, they're on the cutting edge of those things, and you couple that with people who have business experience, who have seen it before, then you have that collaboration of, okay, I recognize industry trends with, I also understand the unique nuances to this space where the X is not relevant to this, but Y very much is. So let's replicate Y and then let's innovate X, and that leads to success.
Yeah, agreed. And I've been in this space for long enough now that I've worked with enough people that have gone on, like me, to become startup founders.
Yeah.
Because they've got so frustrated with the industry not adapting to the change in the landscape they could be licensing into quick enough, and then taking that step to say, well, I'm going to be the change.
Right. I'll do it myself.
If I can't get my company to do it, then I'll start my own.
Right.
And I'm looking a lot at the moment at companies started by friends of mine who are in AI generative composition, right? And even things like, again, I know I said I wasn't an early adopter, but I've been obsessed recently with ChatGPT. I just sit at home for half an hour just trying to work out if there's anything it won't answer.
Yeah.
And I found a few things, right? There are things that it can't tell me. Typically, if you ask it to do something related to a news event post 2021. But you just start playing around with it and you go, hang on a minute, that could be a thing. And so I know a lot more about AI generative composition than I ever thought I would, but it's because I know people that are doing really interesting things, and it could be useful for Lick down the road.
Well, and I think having that general curiosity of not just being satisfied with what I know or what I'm doing, but that continual, what's up with this, or I want to learn more about that, and then digging in a little bit deeper than just surface level, to where you do, worst case scenario, you're knowledgeable about something even if it doesn't apply to your business today.
Yeah. Agreed. And I think that's what makes me passionate about this metaverse product. I keep calling it the metaverse product. We are calling it Chorus as a product name.
Chorus, like a song?
Chorus. Yeah, yeah. Because the problem we had to solve was, how can we deliver multiple different streams of music to multiple devices simultaneously in the same district, right, in the metaverse?
Sounds complicated.
And what we said was it needs to play in chorus. They need to play simultaneously, and so we were looking for, okay. So what we have to work out is, we've done this, by the way, is there are no ears and no walls in the metaverse.
Right.
There are devices that you hear through. There are virtual walls. But your avatar still, quote unquote, walks into a venue. So if you're on the street and you walk through a door into a bar, you can't hear the music. You open the door, you can hear the music.
Right.
Then you open the door and leave the bar, and you can hear the music. You open the door, and then you can't hear the music.
Right.
So we need to deliver that experience.
Right.
But then 4,000 pixels up on your screen is another bar that your avatar can walk into.
Yep.
And when he opens that door, he needs to hear whatever music that bar is playing,
Right.
which is different from the first bar. So how do we deliver multiple different streams, tens of thousands of them potentially, into different venues in the same district, selected by individual venues to multiple differing devices all over the world?
Wow.
As if you're all in the same room. I know it sounds like one of those things that no one needs to know how it's built, but that's the technological solution we have to build. We have to build a player that can be programmed by our customers. Mm-hmm. So venue A has ordered music, play music into venue A. Venue A has ordered rock music, only play rock music into venue A. Venue B is now ordering music. Venue B wants hip hop, right? So A, it needs to do that. But B, it needs to understand how big venue B is so that your avatar is only hearing venue B music, right? And it needs to know when your token has crossed their threshold. So the player needs to be able to read coordinates. It needs to be able to read a blueprint of a city.
Spatial audio sort of a thing?
No, spatial audio is something different. Okay. But I get how you got there because, it's about delivering audio into space.
The closer I get to something, the louder I hear it, sort of a thing is where my mind goes. Mm-hmm.
Pretty much. So that's the technological issue. Then you've got how do we charge for it? How do we distribute royalties? And then you've got can we sign people up to both these models that we took a stab at in the dark, right?
Yeah.
But the point I'm making is there's so many sexy things happening in the metaverse around music, but with any good building, you don't start at the penthouse.
Correct. Yeah.
You don't build a block of flats from the penthouse up. You do the unsexy stuff and you build the foundations.
Right.
And my point to the music industry is I don't want to touch your concerts. I don't want to touch your NFTs. I'm not trying to cut myself into something that you should be doing, that your artists have, spent all their lives creating the brand advocacy and equity to be exploiting themselves. What I'm saying to you is there is an always-on, scalable solution here, which is just every day. It's just every day, everywhere.
Yeah. It's every the radio. Day. It's the metaverse radio, right?
Every day, everywhere. In fact, I quite like that phrase. I'm going to be using it now when I talk to labels and publishers. This is about every day, everywhere, not 3 times a year in one place, right? And that's what makes it scalable.
I like that.
How many artists can we deliver revenue for if we're in 70,000 venues in one metaverse platform? Right. We signed a deal with with Vegas City in Decentraland. And there are tens of thousands of venues between Vegas City and Decentraland. Now, if we can put music into all of them, it's going to generate a lot of money for the music industry. It's going to create a lot more engagement for Decentraland and Vegas City, and it's going to deliver a much better user experience for the avatars and the users that are going and spending their valuable attention time to be there. That's what they're granting you, and you've got to grab it. They're saying, grab my attention, and you've got to go and do it. And that's what excites me. That's why I'm passionate about it. You ask me if I go into these rooms and say, why won't I take no for an answer? Well, because you're all just thinking about these tentpole opportunities that a handful of artists can exploit. When I'm talking to you about let's get 60 million songs played once a day throughout the metaverse, every day, everywhere.
Yeah, what I love about what you're doing is the mutual beneficial attributes of the whole thing, where obviously you have the obvious benefits to the artists, but what you just expressed is it's not just Marshmello and Post Malone who are going to get these tentpole opportunities anyway. It's maybe that startup band that just hit, or that niche band who, with this unique subculture is very popular. And then you have what do metaverse platforms need? They need people to come. They need to retain that interest. They need to pull them back, right? And then what does the consumer, the attendee need? They need to have their experiences be memorable and meaningful, and it all works together this way with Licked.
Correct. And if you can come up with a solution, and linearly put everyone in that value chain from beginning to end, and do the thinking through it. Do they benefit? Do they benefit? And you end up, with 5 stakeholders and 5 green ticks. Then you go, well, this makes sense for everyone,
right?
And that's when you end up arguing with yourself, preparing for a conversation with a stubborn rights holder.
Right. Well, one thing too, I've always thought is audio is often the most overlooked, but one of the most impactful parts of an experience. Do you remember back in the day, I don't know if they had these in the UK, but when you were in the US, Bose stores, where Bose, the headphone company, built out a mini theater in their store. And so you'd go in there, they'd show them like a little mini movie, and they had these huge speakers in the corners. And like during the mini movie, they would turn the audio off and they'd turn it on. And the surprise and delight aspect of it was they would pick up those big speakers, and they were covers over like speakers that were like this big. They could be in the corners of your house. But ever since that, I think I was like 19, 20 years old when I first saw that, is how impactful audio is to our overall experiences.
Yes. Well, if we go back to that story I told you at the beginning about taking the CDs in the edit suite.
Yeah.
I thought it was my music.
Right.
That's how people feel about it. I mean, less so today.
I paid $12. That's my CD. Yeah.
Less so today because you don't own the physical CD, right?
Right.
So it's a bit more distributed and decentralized in terms of, I might have one song from that artist in my favorite playlist.
Yeah.
But I curated that playlist like a DJ set, right?
Right.
And people feel proprietary about music. That's why it's always being undervalued, right? Because it's all around us and it's so everyday. But that's all the more reason why it should be in all new digital landscapes as soon as possible. I don't say that to undermine the remuneration opportunity or revenue opportunity for rights holders. I say it so that we can exploit it early. When I look at what happened on YouTube, there was essentially a black hole in the upper echelons of YouTube content when it comes to music for many, many years.
Right.
And when I looked at the metaverse and heard the stock music in both of those venues, I was like, it would be a travesty if they let this happen here as well.
Right.
And that's what Licht tries to solve. Licht should look at all those opportunities and say, if we build tech, we can get there on day one. The music industry, no one entity in the music industry, not one, owns all of the rights necessary to exploit any opportunity.
Interesting.
Right? You've got labels that own recordings and publishers that own lyrics and melody and represent writers. And to get one song on Licht, right, if it's got one writer and one artist, I need a label deal and a publisher deal.
Right.
If there's 5 writers, I need to have 5 of the biggest publishers in the world, $5 billion corporations, get through a contract agreement with me and have the same done with the label.
That's not happening on the evening of day 1 or the morning of day 2.
Yeah, but that's just to get one song live.
Right.
So, that's why we think, okay, if we can build the tech that says to the market, you must have been looking at this as a potential opportunity. You must have been wondering how you as an industry were going to get there and solve it. Well, we've done it.
That's incredible. It sounds to me like your clients who you'd love to connect with, correct me if I'm wrong, sounds like obviously publishers, you have music publishers, you have some contracts, some relationships there already. Also metaverse platforms. Anybody else that I'm missing out here who is the right connection for you, who should reach out? So
Licht.co is the platform that's mature, that's up and running, right? That's the user generated content platform, right? For that, it's content creators. We're building another platform for brands, because I don't know if you read in the press like I do, Sony sued Gymshark for $200 million for using their music without rights.
Yeah.
And all 3 major labels are suing Bang Energy because Bang Energy used 200 pieces of music without the rights.
Yikes.
But I know, they're right to do it, by the way. People shouldn't be exploiting catalog like that.
Right.
But I have some sympathy, because if these people tried to legally license the music, they'd have been so put off by the process that they thought, well, let them come to us.
Right.
Right. And typically the music industry has actually enabled that sort of behavior. But we're building a solution for that in conjunction with the world's biggest labels, by the way. They're saying we've got this problem and we need it solved, and they came to us to help them with it. I haven't spoken about it today, but that's another opportunity. So UGC creators, brands, and metaverse platforms absolutely are our customers.
Fantastic. What I'm hearing from you is, in that process, essentially, is sometimes when somebody owns all the keys to the kingdom, it doesn't matter to them how difficult the process is, because they hold all the keys. And I think it's true, just regardless of industry, is when you lower the barriers to something, when you make it easier to do something, you're going to get more of that. And so if our goal is more legally licensed music that artists are getting paid for, how can we streamline that process so everyone from a Bang Energy to a Decentraland, etc., can very quickly go through that and get the music they want? And that's the solution Lick is providing.
John, you are bang on, right? And you made me think. Oh, I should have said this earlier, right? But you prompted it in me. The reason we get so much resistance, even when we know we are providing a solution to a problem and providing an at-scale revenue opportunity, is that historically the music industry has always owned the means of production and the means of distribution. And that means they historically have monetized scarcity. Right? And everything we come to them with is about democratization.
Right.
And democratization is the other end of the spectrum.
The opposite, yeah.
Right? And so that's a problem. I'm saying to them, there are 6 billion £1 opportunities out here, whereas they're saying, if we don't let anyone use anything, we can license this one time for $6 billion. Right? And so we're both saying the same thing. There's a $6 billion opportunity, but in one aspect, you have to let the asset go, right?
Yeah.
The other, you have to hoard it. Now, that's why they fought against Napster, because it democratized music, whether you like it or not, and it was illegal and it shouldn't have operated that way. But I used to get really fed up of walking into a CD shop and saying, well, this album's $7.99 and that one's $13.99. Why? Because I said so. Right? Okay, fine, be like that. But then when someone comes along on iTunes and says everything's 99p, and the music industry revolts, and they say, I don't care, we're doing it anyway, get on board or miss out. And starts to reshape the music industry. That's the beginning of democratization through digitization. Everything we're doing is about micro licensing. You can't afford to do this yourself, because by the time your lawyer reads the contract, you're in negative equity, right? This requires automation. This requires auto-generated licenses, delivery through technology, and claiming vast digital landscapes at scale. And get in there early and grab that land.
Absolutely.
And that's not how they have operated traditionally.
Well, I love the disruption and the innovation that you're providing in this industry. As we come to the end of this recording, what are the ways that people can get in touch with you, in touch with your team, in the way that you would like them to? So,
Licked is at Get Licked, and that's no E in Licked. So GETLICKD on all socials.
Got it.
And I am at Sampson Paul, I think, on all socials.
If you don't pop up, try something else. Well,
I say that because LinkedIn isn't an at, is it? But yeah, Sampson, SAMPSON. And I'm happy to talk to anyone that is innovating in our space or innovating in other spaces and just thinks that there's some learnings to be had. But listen, I really enjoyed the conversation, man. Thanks so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate it as well. I'm a big fan of featuring people, providing a platform and highlighting folks who are doing things that benefit other people, that are innovative in their thought process, and, making our experiences better all around. So, Paul Sampson, really appreciate you. Really appreciate what the Lick team is doing. Thank you for joining me today on the DLC Drop podcast.
You're very welcome. All the best.
Thank you for listening to the DLC Drop podcast. This podcast is part of the Esports Futuri Podcast Network and produced by Innovation Media Enterprises. Make sure you subscribe on your favorite podcast channel and leave us a review.